Welcome, everybody, to another Diabetes Canada healthcare provider webinar. I'm very excited for you to be joining us for a nutrition series. And today we're talking about making peace with food, how to help your clients navigate diabetes and their food relationship, a very important topic. And I'm very excited to introduce or hand it over to our special host for these nutrition series webinars, Rebecca Savdi. Thanks for joining us, Rebecca.
Thank you, Grace. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is Rebecca Savdi, and I'm a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator and co-founder of Idea Diabetes. I'm joining from the West Coast, British Columbia, the unceded and traditional territories of the Cowichan, the Halalt, and the Penelakut. And I'm excited to be hosting this three-part nutrition series. Before I introduce our guest speaker today, I'll just let you know about the other two topics. The other food insecurity and diabetes, as well as diets and diabetes care, the pros and cons of current recommendations around therapeutic diets. So be sure to check those out. Jasna is our guest speaker today, Jasna Robinson-Wright. She is a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator and certified intuitive eating counselor based in Ottawa. She's the founder of the private practice Peace of Mind Nutrition and also provides one-on-one counseling and group services at Eating Disorders Clinic, The Balanced Practice. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Jasna.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. So thank you so much for that wonderful welcome. I'm so excited to be here today and to talk to you about making peace with food, how to help your clients navigate diabetes and their food relationship. So our learning objectives for this webinar are to understand the unique challenges for maintaining a healthy relationship with food and with body while living with diabetes, to learn how to explore your client's relationship with food and identify those at risk for problematic eating, to be able to define intuitive eating and learn how and when to incorporate its principles into diabetes education and care, and to be able to identify additional resources for support. I would like to acknowledge that I'm facilitating this webinar from the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, also known as Ottawa. I recognize that I also work virtually across Ontario and therefore across many different traditional Indigenous territories. As a settler, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here and thank all of the generations of people who have cared for this land for thousands of years before me. So this is me. As Rebecca mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, and certified intuitive eating counselor. And on this slide, I've put some of my identities and privileges that have influenced my personal and professional experiences. I'll give you a minute to look through them. So if we start thinking about the eating relationship with food, the eating relationship is really a spectrum where at the start of the arrow on the left of this screen, we see someone who's able to be an intuitive and competent eater. They don't have hang-ups about body image or can at least accept and find peace with their bodies despite living in our weight-centric society. And they can eat in response to internal cues around food, such as hunger and fullness, rather than restricting food as a way to try to fix their bodies. We'll be talking more about what it means to be an intuitive eater later on in this webinar. As we move along this continuum towards the right of the screen, we see increasing distrust around body and food and increasingly disordered thoughts and behaviors around eating. All of us, including our patients and ourselves, fall somewhere along this continuum. And many of our clients will experience some level of disordered eating or problematic relationship with food and their bodies at some point in their lives. Within the context of diabetes, there can be several challenges to maintaining a healthy relationship with food and with one's body. This slide talks a little bit about some of those challenges. So receiving a diagnosis of diabetes or being told that our blood sugar is on the rise or that we're starting to experience some complications related to diabetes can be pretty scary. And it can elicit some feelings of shame and guilt, like the client should have prevented this or somehow it's their fault. During vulnerable times like this, where emotions are really heightened, we can feel an increased pull towards what seems like solutions or cures. Quick fixes like extreme diets are much more appealing at times like this. On top of this, many clients receive all or nothing messaging about diets and exercise and conflicting or confusing information about nutrition. Recommendations to cut out whole food groups, restrict portions, or to fast to manage blood sugars can lead to disordered eating and thoughts and behaviors around food for some clients. Increased attention to what we're eating as part of reducing the risk of diabetes or managing diabetes can be a trigger too, especially in type 1, where we do actually need to count carbohydrates to accurately pair insulin. This much attention to what, how much, and when we're eating can increase the risk of a problematic relationship with food. Even in type 2 or in gestational diabetes, we can be spending much more time paying attention to what we're eating, which can be triggering. Counting food can also make our brains categorize foods into what feels like good or bad, safe or unsafe, which can make eating and our relationship with food increasingly rigid. Blood sugar testing can feel just like the name, a test. And it can feel like a test that we're either passing or failing. In cases where we are using mealtime insulin, we do need to be checking blood glucose for safety. However, many of our clients likely don't need to be checking blood sugars as often as they might be. And we might want to explore a little bit further with clients who are checking really frequently, whether this is creating anxiety around eating or whether it's creating beliefs that some foods are good while other foods are bad. Similar to blood sugar testing, getting weighed can feel like a test, one that we're either passing or failing. Or it can simply increase attention around this number and put it up on a pedestal and increase feelings of shame around one's body if we're feeling like we're not passing this test. When I'm told losing weight will help manage diabetes, I feel helpless, disappointed, and frustrated. It would seem like an unrealistic goal. We are led to believe that we should have control and it is our fault, even by health professionals. This can lead to years of disordered eating and mental health issues. This was a quote from one of my clients who lives in a larger body with diabetes. And I think that it really illustrates the idea of intention versus impact. I don't think any of us became healthcare providers to make our patients feel bad. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite. I think we became health professionals because we want to help. And yet, even with the very best of intentions, talking about weight as though it's something that a person can and should control can have some negative and long-term impacts with the relationship with food. So, how do I talk to my client about their food relationship? I actually think that working in diabetes care has us really well positioned to start open conversations about the relationship with food and with body. Most of us are likely talking about food and eating at some level if we're discussing blood sugar management or medications or insulin. We can be asking our clients, tell me more about your relationship with food. How do you feel about your eating? What is your body image like these days? And how does diabetes affect your relationship with food? It's often less about the words that we say to our clients and more about how we're holding space for the client to talk about how food makes them feel in a place where they feel that they won't be judged for their eating. We want clients to know that it's okay for food to be more than just about their health and their diabetes. Food is supposed to be enjoyable and pleasurable. It's impossible to separate emotions and eating entirely. If I think about the nutrition chapter in the clinical practice guidelines, we even talk about all nutrition recommendations for that specific client need to be in line with their values and their food preferences for it to be sustainable. When we're talking to our clients about their eating, we don't want to be contributing to shame by making them feel that they're eating in a way that is wrong or that they aren't trying hard enough. If we do suspect some disordered eating for a client, we can also screen for eating disorders. The SCOFF questionnaire is a brief screening tool that I've linked up here on the slide. So now let's talk about intuitive eating and how it fits into the picture. The original book, Intuitive Eating, was written by two dietitians in California, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Reich, in the 1990s, after they noticed that weight loss attempts didn't seem to stick for most of their clients in the long run. They've since written 4 editions of the book. The most recent is pictured up here on the slide. as well as a workbook and a workbook specifically for teens. There is a validated assessment tool called the Intuitive Eating Assessment Scale number 2, and there have been over 100 published studies on intuitive eating in various populations, including a few in people with diabetes. So what is intuitive eating? Intuitive eating is a framework for eating that incorporates instinct, emotion, and rational thought, and encourages tuning into internal cues around food like hunger, fullness, and satisfaction, rather than eating for external reasons, like have I cleaned my plate, or what is everybody else eating? Intuitive eating has 10 principles, and at its core is aligned with the principles of health at every size, or HAES, which is a weight-inclusive concept created by researcher Lindo Bacon that promotes that all people, regardless of their body size or shape, are deserving of appropriate health care. And it focuses on improving body image and encouraging enjoyable forms of physical activity and eating nutritious foods, rather than dietary restriction and exercise for the purpose of weight control. I've listed the 10 principles of intuitive eating up here on the screen, and I'll go through them briefly. So number 1 is rejecting the dieting mentality, or the idea that about 95% of people can't sustainably change their body shape and size by restricting food. Number 2 is honoring your hunger, tuning into physical sensations as one of our main cues to eat. Number 3 is making peace with food, allowing all foods and systematically challenging feared foods. Number 4 is challenging the food police, reframing disordered thoughts about food and questioning where these thoughts came from. Number 5 is discovering the satisfaction factor. I know that Elise and Evelyn often suggest starting here because this is the fun part of food. This is about tuning into preferences around taste, texture, and what feels satiating. This principle is very aligned with the concept and skill set of mindful eating. Number 6 is feeling fullness, learning to tune into the physical sensations of when our body has had enough. Number 7 is coping with your emotions with kindness, developing ways to cope other than using food, and including gentleness with ourselves if food is one of the ways that we're coping. Number 8 is respecting our body and accepting our body size and shape. Our bodies have done a lot for us. They've got us to this point. And number 9 is movement, engaging in enjoyable forms of movement and focusing on what feels good rather than specifically on weight control. And lastly, number 10 is gentle nutrition, incorporating nutrition messages in a way that still aligns with the principles of intuitive eating. And I think this last one is so relevant in diabetes care. We can still incorporate evidence-based nutrition messages and eat intuitively. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And recognizing that intuitive eating is one of the tools in our toolbox. It might not be appropriate for all people at all times. We may need structured eating at times when hunger and fullness signals aren't online. And we can still incorporate some of the other principles. So in general, studies on intuitive eating show that individuals who are able to eat more intuitively tend to have better dietary quality, lower risk of disordered eating, more stable weights, and better body image compared to those who eat less intuitively. There have only been a handful of studies on diabetes and intuitive eating specifically, but those that have been done have shown promising results. So I'll present the ones that have been done on diabetes and intuitive eating specifically. A study by Soares et al. In 2020 showed that people with type 2 diabetes, primarily taking anti-hyperglycemic agents without insulin, who eat more intuitively have better glycemic control compared to those who are less able to tune into hunger and fullness. A study by Ramos and colleagues, also in 2020, showed that again in adults with type 2 diabetes, those who eat more in accordance with their hunger and fullness cues have better body image and body satisfaction. There were 2 studies done by Kwanzaa and colleagues in 2019 that found that among women who'd had gestational diabetes, those who ate more intuitively after their diabetes had lower fasting glucose and A1C at 6 to 8 weeks postpartum, and again at 1 year postpartum, compared to those who ate less intuitively. And finally, a study by Wheeler and colleagues in 2015 found that adolescents with type 1 diabetes were much less likely to be able to eat intuitively, unfortunately, compared to their peers. But those who did eat intuitively had markedly better glycemic control. This is a quote from one of my clients who is Métis, has PCOS and a history of binge eating disorder, and has been working really hard on reducing her risk of diabetes. Learning about intuitive eating and other non-diet approaches has allowed me to make positive changes in my life. As someone who has struggled in my relationship with food and my body, weight-centric approaches to diabetes prevention and health management feel unattainable for me and prevented me from making positive changes in the past. I think that we can all incorporate some principles from intuitive eating and health at every size into the way that we practice with our clients. For starters, the clinic environment sends a message to our clients about what kinds of bodies are okay here. Do we have chairs that clients can fit into comfortably? Do we have posters sending messages about the bodies that are okay or the types of food that are okay? We should be questioning whether we really need to weigh a client. And if we believe that we do, we should be asking for consent. Some clients might also wish to be weighed backwards and not told their weight. Similarly, we should be asking clients for permission to talk about their weight with them. We also want to be looking at the kinds of messaging we give about food. Even when someone has diabetes, all foods can be included. We don't actually have evidence, according to the most recent clinical practice guidelines, that specific foods should not be allowed. When we talk about foods as good or bad, eating them makes us good or bad. I tend to tell clients that we want to think about what we can add to a snack or a meal, like adding protein or fiber or plant fats, to balance it out for our blood sugars, rather than taking away foods. The types of resources we give to clients can also reinforce our messaging around food. Giving handouts that put foods into categories of foods to avoid or foods to limit can set up rigid guidelines for eating that may be harmful for some of our clients. We want to explore and address underlying issues that impact food for a client. For example, food insecurity makes it very difficult for someone to be able to eat intuitively and listen to hunger and fullness cues. Stress around reliable access to food significantly impacts someone's relationship with food. Similarly, trauma and mental health issues may impact someone's ability to eat intuitively and competently, and will likely need to be addressed as part of helping an individual work on their relationship with food. Here are some suggestions for further developing your knowledge and skills around navigating the relationship with food and body with your clients. I've added a link to the Intuitive Eating website at the top of the slide. There's some articles and resources available for healthcare professionals and interested clients, as well as information for those who want to become certified intuitive eating counselors. The Association for Size, Diversity, and Health, or ASDA, has a website that's a great place to start learning more about health at every size. I highly recommend the Intuitive Eating book and workbook, as well as the book Anti-Diet by registered dietitian and journalist Christy Harrison. Clinical supervision from colleagues who work in this space can also be a very valuable way to learn more about how we can specifically help our own clients. And case consulting, as well as referring those suspected of having disordered eating or eating disorders to specialist multidisciplinary teams, is imperative to help clients receive appropriate treatment. Thank you for taking the time to start thinking about how to help your clients make peace with food. Feel free to get in touch with me. I've put some of my contact information up here on the slide.
Jasna, thank you for an excellent presentation. I learned a lot, really well done. A couple things that really stood out to me or that I loved about what you talked about. The quotes are really powerful and they really bring the stories to life. So thank you for bringing some quotes. You talked about holding space to talk about food, and I think that's really important in a safe environment. You also talked about what that environment looks like and in creating an environment that is comfortable to all people. I really enjoyed the discussion around joy and pleasure in food and incorporating and acknowledging values and individual values as a part of that. Really appreciate the tools and resources that you shared in addition to the practical tips, and bringing together the principles of intuitive eating and other anti-diet approaches and the eating for diabetes. I think that you did a really excellent example of putting the care back in healthcare. So really appreciate that. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to pass it back to Grace now.
Thank you so much. You can watch all of our past webinars and the other webinars in this series now at guidelines.diabetes.ca/webinars, and there's also a link to our podcast there. Please fill out the survey. There's a link below the video on guidelines.diabetes.ca/webinars. This will help us improve our webinars in the future, and you can also suggest topics you'd like to see. Consider becoming a member of Diabetes Canada. As a professional member, you'll get access to the Canadian Journal of Diabetes, the Diabetes Communicator, a discount to conference, and access to our online community, along with so much more. Our professional members can continue the conversation about today's topic at community.diabetes.ca. And if you enjoyed today's presentation, consider making a donation, as all of our webinars for healthcare providers are free. You can donate at www.diabetes.ca/donate, and this helps us provide more webinars and content for healthcare providers in the future. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.